Hey everybody, I just wanted to share my setup for reloading the fabulous cartridge 22 TCM. I'm using a Lee Pro 1000 that I have set up for it here. I have a 223 shell plate in it. This one is a press that I use to load 223 and 22 TCM. I'm using the Lee 22 TCM dies that are from Fred Craig. That are available through Armscore, through Fred Craig, a couple other places. And I have this press set up to use H110, and I have my once fired brass over here that I cleaned, tumbled, and some are chamfered and deburred, some aren't. So you'll see some of them are hard to put the little bullet head on there, especially with my giant hands and how tiny these little components are. But I'm also using Winchester's small rifle primers. It hasn't really seemed to make much of a difference as far as the type of primer that I'm using or anything like that. As far as velocity and them actually going boom or anything like that. But it's a fairly easy process with the Pro 1000. It's definitely not the cartridge that I would choose to start reloading on as your first initial reloading experience. You definitely want to be a little bit experienced with reloading before you start loading one of these, because they are a bottleneck cartridge. You have to make sure that the initial die is set up to bump that shoulder back, or else you may have issues with them going into battery. And also, it's a high pressure cartridge, so if your powder charges are not very good, if you're not weighing them out individually, or you're not making sure that they're consistent, and you overcharge a case, you could end up blowing your gun to pieces and hurting yourself or others. So, you know, it's one of those cartridges you do have to be careful with. I'm using the max load in these, which is about 10 grains of powder. I found that much less than that, I was having a little bit of ejection issues. I would start low and work your way up. Maybe do a couple small batches of them first, though. I wouldn't go out and probably load up a billion of them with one particular charge until you find out what your gun likes. And also, like I said, you got to be really careful about making sure that you get that shoulder back to the right specs as far as what a factory round is, or else you'll have issues with them not going into batteries. So it's always a good idea to do a plunk test, drop them in your barrel, make sure that they'll actually feed in the gun before you load up, you know, 100, 200, 500, 1,000 of these, whatever floats your boat. But the good thing is, H110 seems to load fantastically consistent with the Lee Autodisc setup. You can see that this one is one that's not chamfered and deburred, so it's like playing Jenga to get the bullet head to actually stay on there and get feeded properly into the die. Once it's in the die, it's no big deal, whereas this one was chamfered and deburred. It'll sit right in there and go in no problem. You know, I have been experimenting with, you know, just trimming the case back just a tad by chamfering and deburring them, like I said, just to make them not do that, and also testing, you know, case life and everything like that. And you can see some of these are a real pain to get them to stay on there, because I have big hands. This is a tiny little bullet, and you know, even in Fred Craig's literature, he mentions that you might want to get like a universal expander, and that may not be a terrible idea, but I found that just chamfering the case just a little bit will alleviate that issue as well. Again, this is not probably the ideal cartridge to begin your reloading career with, because you really do have to pay attention. You could very simply, you know, make a mistake and cause some major issues. I'm weighing about every 10 of these and finding that the Lee Autodisc setup is really good with H110. It does kind of tend to make a little bit of a mess. You can see, well, maybe you can't because I'm shooting this with my iPhone, but there is a little bit of powder on my shell plate, it doesn't seem to matter. Once it gets going, it kind of consistently spills powder. So because it's doing that, it's staying so consistent that everything stays within 1/10 of a grain, if not dead on all the time anyway. The other thing that I found is it is more similar to a rifle cartridge, so a little bit of case lube goes a long way. I'm just using like Hornady One Shot, a little bit of case lube, some dry lube before I actually run them through the press so that they work properly. You can see I'm having to guide them in for the ones that haven't been chamfered and deburred. So, you know, it can be a little bit frustrating at first until you get it all worked out, but I've been shooting these so much for the last couple of weeks, having such a good time that I'm like constantly loading these. You know, I have a few hundred of them, and I probably shot like 500 of these this week. Between my father and I, we both have 22 TCMs, and every time we go to the range, like, we get like a whole crowd of people that want to know about them because it's such a weird cartridge when they can't even believe it's coming out of a pistol when they hear how loud and bright it is. So I've probably let like a dozen people shoot my gun in the last like month here. Just anybody that's like interested, I'm, you know, sort of end up dragging them over, and they're like, "Oh my God, what is that?" And I let them shoot it, and they just can't believe the recoil, how light it is, how accurate it is, how far you can actually shoot it. It does do some pretty good damage to steel targets, so you might want to be careful if you're into shooting steel. I shoot a lot of steel, and it's putting a hurting on my 1/4-inch plates, that's for sure. So it's definitely something that I mean, I wouldn't even hesitate to carry this round, to be honest with you, with what I've seen it do to some of the targets that I've shot. I mean, it's unbelievable. I'm really looking forward to the bolt action variant of this weapon system. So, you know, it's reloading is going well. It's very economical to reload. If you're not losing your brass, you're looking at between like $6, $7.50 per 500 or per 50 pack, which is a significant savings over the factory loads, of course. But then again, you're running the risk of making sure that you know what you're doing, and making sure that you don't injure yourself or somebody else or your firearm, making sure that you're doing the right thing. So, you know, I'm hesitant to like put out much reload data on this as far as like what I'm using, but there are some forums out there, there is some information out there. Please don't take my word as law, but the 22 TCM is a really sweet cartridge. These will all probably be gone by like, you know, in 2 days, because I'll shoot them all up. But the bullet heads are really, really cheap. They're the same ones. They're right from Armscore. They're the TCM 40 grain bullet heads, and you know, it's a really fantastic cartridge to reload. It's pretty easy. H110 is not a terribly expensive powder. You know, you can use either small rifle or small pistol primers. I chose to use the rifle primers just because I had a whole bunch of them around for 223. Like I said, this is using a what is that? I guess a number 4 shell plate, which would be the same thing you would use for a 223, and yeah, it's going pretty well. It's a nice little cartridge. I'm loading them a little bit lighter than the factory rounds, so they're not putting out quite as much velocity, but it doesn't seem to be affecting my accuracy or anything like that. I still get a big, nice, bright muzzle flash, and the only real indication I have that they're not as powerful is the difference between what like a factory box will do versus my reloads on steel. The factory ones really hurt it pretty badly, and these don't hurt it nearly as bad. So, you know, you want to stay within Fred's parameters. You know, I've mentioned on my website that Armscore's been a little bit hesitant, so is Fred, as far as getting reloading components out here. I applaud them for actually getting dies made by Lee at an affordable price. I think $75 is really, really reasonable for a set of custom dies. And you know, they've mentioned to me, you know, just in conversation, because if you ever need anything, I mean, Fred's an awesome guy. You can call him and talk to him. He's an amazing designer. They said that they've been a little bit hesitant with making these available, just because it is a Wildcat cartridge. It doesn't really have like excuse me, SAMI data as far as pressures and stuff like that, and you know, they don't want to have any kind of real responsibility for anybody destroying themselves or a gun or anything like that, and I can't blame them at all. So you take full responsibility for reloads, which is, you know, obvious anyway. But again, the only things I've been having issues with are getting that bullet head in there if it's not chamfered and deburred. You did see it probably malfunction just one time pushing the casing in. With them being bottlenecked and dropping down in the tube feeder, it gets a little bit weird. Every one of my Pro 1000s has like baling wire and all kinds of stuff to assist it to go down the ramp, and I made a little ramp out of Kydex here that's nice and slick. But you can see, I mean, I have that on all of them. Here's my 45 press, my 9mm press is the same way. I have all these weird little thingies on there to make everything work right. While I have you on the video here, I'll show you this. This is kind of cool too. I just built this out of Kydex. This is my whole little primer shoot system, and it's not finished yet. On my other one, they all end up going down the ramp into this big primer bin thingy. But yeah, it's coming along pretty good.